Welcome, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about the movie The Truman Show. Luke and I have both seen it many times, but recently we did a rewatch and I was shocked. Really, my impression was you could pause every single moment of that movie and dissect it to pieces. There are symbols laden throughout the movie, and today's discussion is only going to scratch the surface. But we brought on Dr. Luke to have this conversation with us. This will probably be a bit of free associating across all of the symbols and themes of the film. And if we're lucky, I'm hoping he will share with us some personal synchronicities that he's been experiencing, well, we've been experiencing, related to this movie.
Yeah, I don't know how much I want to share because it will indict me as some sort of schizophrenic. Because I think anyone who watches The Truman Show, especially in the age of social media, will start to think themselves to be a type of Truman. Now, there's lots of layers to that, and I don't have a whole thesis that I'm prepared to completely explicate at this point. And I have to echo what you said earlier about there being so many layers of interpretation. I went back and I watched the first 20 minutes of the film in the gym today before we got to do this tonight. And even within 48 hours, I interpreted a new layer of meaning. So I can only anticipate that viewings 8, 9, 10, 20 will yield even more gems that perhaps are intentionally buried, but then raises a very interesting question about cinemancy or cinematic archetypes manifesting regardless of the intent of the director and the actors that are involved. And some of what we talk about here could be synchronistic. Like I don't have access to Jim Carrey or whoever directed this movie. I should know the name of the director. Some of the things we talk about, I think, are there, but the individuals that were involved in the making of the film would probably deny that they even tried to make this happen. It might have just been an arrangement from eternity, the stars aligning.
Yes, this is the eternal question
Yeah.
we've been exploring regarding many films, many movies, many shows. How much is intentional on the individual human's parts,
Hmm.
and how much is just either the symbolic language of any layer of the matrix really we find ourselves in. We are
Yep.
nested seemingly in simulations, and we'll get into that probably with
Yep.
the movie. How much also is it the divine potentially
Sure.
shining through all of us in an unconscious manner?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a thesis that I'm more and more comfortable with. Jung talked about this in terms of people who are truly inspired that don't even realize that perhaps they're becoming a mouthpiece for the collective unconscious. So I think that is something that I take solace in when I particularly do analyses of the films of Kubrick, because the alternative is to start thinking that the individuals who are involved in these productions have like godlike powers. And I think we ought to be real careful before we ascribe those characteristics to mere mortals.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I don't expect we're going to solve that mystery
Sure.
completely in this particular segment, but it is something that pervades a lot of the work you are doing over on
Sure.
your channel.
Sure. So where do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. There is a particular quote that was very early on in the film that I think kind of sets the stage, and that is, it's not fake, it's controlled.
Mhm.
We haven't discussed this
No,
bit
we haven't.
before, but I'm wondering, it really struck me when we were watching the movie. Does it elicit any type of response for you?
It's not fake, but it's controlled. I mean, because the element of choice and spontaneity is not completely annihilated in one single individual, which is Truman, right? Everyone else is an extension really of Christoph. You know, not even the other actors there really have
And
much.
I'm going to interject. Christoph, I mean, obviously, we'll get into the name game in a little
Sure.
bit, but Christ of.
Well, I think so. I think there's a heavy biblical allegory, perhaps multiple biblical allegories that are going on there. And when we get into like the name game part of
Mhm.
this, we can break that down. But going back to what you were saying about uh, uh, it's not fake, but it's controlled. I suppose there is an element of human freedom that is preserved so long as there is one person. Like Truman is this bulwark against total artificiality because he's not in on the script, right? And he has some erratic nature that he can tap into that really causes the simulation to go awry. But so long as he sticks on the program path, it can kind of function. Although we see there's some Deus Machina stuff where, the light falls, right? The serious light. And I think I want to talk about that a little bit. The prevalence of dogs. There, I think not only could you go scene by scene, but we could take certain themes, dogs, golf, and make videos about those things. The role of the dog in in the Truman Show, right, and what that may mean. You could organize it around that. If anybody else wanted to do like a comprehensive series on this, so it seems like Truman is a bulwark about with total artificiality. So long as there is one true living man, a total fake reality cannot overcome a system, regardless of how omnipotent the creator figure is in Christoph. So
That's
that's
super
what it,
interesting.
yeah, that's what it, that's just my first impression of
Yeah.
that quote.
No, I love that you took it to a lot of places I was not foreseeing. So thanks for going along with that. You mentioned several themes in that. I know golf is a big one, dogs, we've got names. Which of those three would you maybe want to start with?
Oh, I mean, there's so many. I mean, let's just go with the dogs since I
Okay.
mentioned that. And right out of the gate, the film, you have Truman is accosted by a Dalmatian named Pluto, right?
Yes.
So this dog, Pluto, jumps up on Truman. Um, and Pluto, I haven't checked my Greek mythology ancestry charts or whatnot, but I believe Pluto is the god of the underworld. Is that right?
I believe so. And
Or am I getting any
astrologically,
confused?
I mean, not everyone uses it in astrology, but it's sort of considered the outer bound, like the most outer points of non physical, physical, kind of moving into each other,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it's the god of Hades or something like
Mm.
that. Don't quote me on that. You probably have to go look it up. But then right after that, we have Truman when he has his first encounter with the anomalous mechanics of the dome. Right, we have this light that falls, probably been hanging up there for his entire life, gets hot and falls, burns through some fabric that is the dome, and it's labeled Sirius. Well, Sirius is a star. It's the dog star, right? So we got two dogs within like the first like 3 minutes of the film, and then he goes to the newspaper stand, and I think there's someone that precedes him, and you see a customer ask for Dog Fancy magazine. So this is such a bizarrely named title for a magazine. So you got Pluto, Sirius, and Dog Fancy magazine. I'm sure there's other dogs that I can't remember, but it's like boom, 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 boom. And so I think it's important to think about why is the director so heavily pointing us in the direction of that? And it could be for a variety of different reasons. Just breaking down who Pluto was, where the name Sirius comes from. But for me, it immediately calls to mind an inversion, right? Specifically, that dog backwards is God, and I think it's also potentially a reference to Toto from The Wizard of Oz, who is this dog godlike figure who leads the crew along and actually is the one that pulls back the veil. So it pulls back the wizard and shows him for what he is, that he's not this great omniscient figure, but just a man with some technology, which is exactly what Kristoff is. So that is not the only reference bringing us back to The Wizard of Oz. And we have Dorothy who goes between Oz and Kansas, just as Truman is going to go beyond his idyllic world, his controlled world, to the um, more depressive, less scripted world. So we think that is outside of the dome. And I also think it's probably not the only reference to the Wizard of Oz that we have in there. There's this love interest who's named Lauren Garland, and I wonder if that name was chosen as a direct reference to Judy Garland, who played Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Of course, making this map all perfect is a little tough. It's just,
Yeah.
it seems to be one of these thematic stories that's in play. They're not always cohesive. It's not really an argument. And sometimes they may just present themselves spontaneously. This also, this is a tale. This is Plato coming out of Plato's cave. This is the Matrix. This is Alice in Wonderland. This is Wizard of Oz. It's just the director may want to just put that us in that universe and create that feeling that we are going on the hero's journey or whatever the soul quest is. So that's what I think the dogs are in part, an inversion of the God that is facilitating revelation. And also, there's the Sirius star falling might also be a biblical allusion to the book of Revelation where the stars actually fall from the sky. That's supposedly one of the things that I think is supposed to happen at the end of time. So it would make sense. It foreshadows Truman experiencing a revelation about his fabricated world. So the apocalypse is really not a scary thing. It's an unveiling.
Right.
And Truman is having his world unveiled. The curtain is being pulled back. And there's a lot. That's just my take right now. I could be wrong.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, today's not about crystallizing what the Truman Show means because I think there's a lot of different messages embedded within it.
Sure.
You touched on Garland's, Judy Garland's.
Mm-hmm.
Let's explore the names a little bit more.
Sure.
I know you brought up there's a tree theme, which potentially connects to the Fraser.
Yeah, so the work I've been doing on the Golden Bough. So right before we went on, I had a moment to just Google some names. So one of the more interesting characters in the Truman Show is a woman who plays Lauren Garland in the set, but her real name is Sylvia, right? And if Sylvia has this opportunity to become Truman's love interest and to red pill him about him being raised in a scripted reality environment before she's pulled off and depicted as some sort of schizophrenic or something like that. So Sylvia is a reference to Sylvan, a woodland scenario. Lauren is a reference to the laurel tree, and Garland, I'm sorry, yeah, and Garland is like a wood wreath, right? That you wear. So all three of these things are pointing her towards the forest. And I think it'd be interesting. She's presented wearing red. She has her little button. How will it end, right? She's in red, right? So I think the idea here, perhaps subliminally, perhaps unintentionally, is to associate her with the tree of knowledge, right? Because she is the one who bestows upon Truman the knowledge that he lives in an unreal world, right? And ultimately, when he gets a taste of this, he's going to spend his life force, his energy trying to find her, which he's told is Fiji. And what is Fiji associated?
Yes, Fiji is an apple.
Right,
exactly.
so,
He's
yeah.
trying to access
And I'm
an
stealing your
apple.
thunder. You
Yeah.
When we saw it the other night, you picked up on
Oh
that.
yes,
And
yeah, I
so
have it in
we're
my
blending
notes.
it all together.
No, I love
that
it.
was your insight. I hadn't made if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have been able to.
Oh well, thank
put it
you.
all
I
together.
mean, I just enjoy
Yeah.
collaborating and seeing how it all connects. Yeah, there's a lot packed in there as well. Like there's really this weaving of all of these different kind of symbolic sub-languages kind of all mixing up in there.
Yeah, and to take that, we are doing the whole Garden of Eden thing, right, with Sylvia and Lauren Garland. So this brings into yeah, we're brought into this scenario, and this is like pretty deep, where Jim Carrey might simultaneously be Adam and Jesus Christ. I don't know how all this works. I think there's some sort of esoteric understanding of biblical narratives here, because Sea Haven, right, which this is something you pointed out. I'm stealing all your ideas here, right? It it is like the Garden of Eden for him, right? So this would kind of make him Adam eating of this knowledge that Sylvia is giving him, right? But later on in the film, we see that he's on the Santa Maria boat, right? And
Saint Mary.
exactly. And the Saint Mary is a vessel, right, that takes him to the new world. A lot of people think this is a reference to Columbus. Perhaps it is, but Jim Carrey, his initials are JC, right? So clearly he is JC within the vessel of the Holy Mary ship, right? Going from one world to another. So it's like there's this bridge between the first man, Adam, and Jim Carrey, Jesus Christ. And a lot of people say, that Jesus Christ was the second Adam, that there's something, there's similarity, that Jesus Christ is restoring mankind to the idyllic state once they ate of the apple. So it's all sort of in play there. It's there in the beginning, it's there at the end.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, while we're on the names and you talked about Jim Carrey, would love for you to share with us, Truman. True Man is the more obvious one.
Yeah, I think everybody gets that one, right?
Yeah.
Like he's this bulwark against artificiality, right?
Right.
But his last name, do you remember his last name?
Perfect.
Burbank. And I don't think that really resonates with a lot of people. And I knew it, I think, from watching like game shows as a kid. I know they filmed a lot of them in Burbank, California,
Mhm.
which I looked it up. Like Burbank is like 10 miles outside of Hollywood or whatever, but it's considered like the media capital of the world. So like Warner Brothers and Disney and people like that film there. So he's Truman Burbank. It's this the true man within the media center, right? And that
Their
makes
kind
total
of attention.
sense. Yeah, yeah. So that finally solved that riddle.
We also we've talked about the water. There is this whole sovereign law or just
Sure.
law angle to this that I don't want to over belabor in this conversation, but his dad being lost at
Yeah.
sea, um, slightly related, but C Corp,
Yeah.
and everything to do with Social Security and just what matrix, what playground, what set of game rules are we operating
Sure.
in? There are a lot of ideas about, the law of the sea
Yep.
versus the law of the land and what jurisdiction you are in. And I definitely think that is a piece of this tapestry.
Yeah, and I don't know as much about it as you do. I mean, I think it raises very interesting questions because once Truman breaks out, he's going to go to the real world, and like a lot of people speculate, oh, what did Truman do after he left? Well, he's probably going to sue Christoph and all of them. The laws may not apply, right? Like there might be something about these maritime laws that allowed a corporation to adopt a human person and do these things to him outside the jurisdiction of the United States. So it it I'm not as versed in that. I'm all about just the archetypal stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I would throw that back to you and say that might be
Well, that's an
an
interesting
area to
point.
explore.
He's born into the system.
Mm.
I like to believe that with knowledge, we're able to take control back. We're able to navigate at least these systems
Yeah.
in a more empowered way.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting question. We're not given in the film the details on what his rights are. Like anyone needs to give us rights. Like that's not how that works. But within this game, we're playing in matrices within matrices within matrices so clearly within the Truman Show. I think this is also true of the reality we're experiencing. But that's an interesting one. I hadn't thought about the logistics of being born into it.
Yeah.
But he does awaken and is able to remove himself.
Yep.
And I think that's a powerful reminder.
I mean, we could keep doing the whole name thing,
Well,
but
okay.
I've potentially exhausted it. You know, we have these twins, these Rod and Don twins.
Yes.
We have Marlin, the best friend. I'll say the Marlin one is interesting. I assume he's named after Marlon Brando, and so it would be
Which has
obvious.
all sorts of other
Right.
implications.
Right. See, this movie is like totally alchemical. And by that, I don't even really know what I mean by that. I have some ideas, but it has the hallmarks of like other alchemical movies that seem to be disclosing big truths. Not to mention, it has redheads, it has twins. You know, these are, and the Marlon Brando thing like brings in, well, not I think it's an appropriate name to give the best friend of Truman because he was the most total method actor of all the individuals that were involved in this fabricated reality because he was inserted into it when he was 7 years old.
7 is also an interesting
Sure.
age in general. My understanding is that's kind of the age where you're not as impressionable and as programmable and you start to exert your own individuation.
So maybe that's why they sent him in there to keep him in the sandbox. That's actually where he even says that. He's like, I met Truman. I don't know. He may have said there's like a companion documentary that it's a faux documentary where they interview all the different characters and there's some interesting revelations in that. But it's I believe Marlon says he met Truman in the sandbox and like took his fire truck from him or something like that. So that would kind of fit with your idea. If 7 is this magic number for individuation, that maybe that stultified it, or that was the hope at introducing the best friend character at age
Mhm.
7. But the name Marlon, I think, clearly
Is a
connects to
reference.
Brando, to the method acting, and this his wife Meryl. It means a lot of different things. It's like a combination of Mary and Beryl, and it also means bright. See, I don't know exactly, but it could also be a reference to like Meryl Streep, who's a celebrated actress, which is
Mhm.
exactly what she is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super interesting.
The Ron and Don twin thing, I think that's super interesting, perhaps relevant to today.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. Do you want to go into that or?
What do I want to go into? Oh, the thing I was going to say about the accompanied documentary, they actually showed how they were, this whole thing, Truman, in one scenario, Truman actually gets on the plane to go to Fiji. But what they do is they simulate a flight
No
to
way.
Fiji, right? And so this is very interesting because there's lots of biblical cosmology clues in the Truman Show, right? Like it's clearly an enclosed environment. Sea Haven itself looks like it has the waters above, right? Which is a reference to Genesis 1, 5, or
Sure.
6. I can't remember exactly which one it is. I think it's 5, right? So, in addition to that, there's all this imagery about local suns and moons, and the man in the moon is where Christoph lives, right? Um, so the idea of like simulating this trip to Fiji, I think this could be reaching, a communication about how fantastical flights could be simulated.
Well, you have him looking in the mirror, drawing himself as an astronaut,
Yes, exactly.
and it seems like he's kind of winking at them, saying like, "I know what's going on,"
Yeah.
but he doesn't say it. You
Right.
know.
And this is also it's also woven together. Like Jim Carrey goes on to be in a movie called Man in the Moon.
Yep.
Like how much of these things just like naturally flow, or it seems like kind of scripted from eternity. Like, and then it just seems like fate that certain individuals are slotted in
Yeah.
life to disclose these things. And Jim Carrey, like whenever he goes, he went on Jay Leno, and he pretty much said that it was not real, but no
Yeah.
one believed him because he said that in like he said that in like the mid 90s or something like
Well,
that.
he has a fabulous, I think, more recent graduation commencement speech that he
Yeah.
gave, where he basically says this reality we find ourselves in,
Yeah.
and these characters, these avatars we are playing. Like he is very direct about it.
Yeah, he
It's
doesn't. Well,
pretty
he doesn't
wild.
really think there's like any distinction in individuals or something like that.
Uh, I think it might be more nuanced
I
than
haven't
that,
seen it. I
but
gotta see it.
I mean, really, like extrapolating the Truman Show to reality, I
Sure.
think, is a bit of
Sure.
it. You took it exactly where I wanted this conversation to go. We were kind of going through these different matrices that are nest egged,
Hmm.
really, is what it feels like. We've got the law one in there, we've got the media one that's hinted at. I mean, it's not so subtle,
Yeah.
but, and we have the cosmological one,
Hmm.
which I'm just gonna say it. And
It's your show.
I don't think you could have made a more obvious flat earth film if you tried. And I cannot believe that a few years ago when I watched this movie, none of that clicked.
I think it has to be just below perception where you don't take it so seriously, right? Like, but clearly all the people in the flat earth movement see it very clearly, and they go, see, this is disclosure.
Yeah, it's wild. You talked about golf at the very beginning, and this could go to a different tangent, but you've mentioned when they pick up the golf ball and he goes, "We're right here," and Fiji's all the way around here.
Right.
Everything they're telling him is a lie.
Yeah.
So why would that not also be a lie?
Sure. And I mean, it's happening right when they're playing golf on the bridge out of town, which symbolizes it's the bridge looks like it's been destroyed, right?
Mhm.
So you get this idea that it's the edge of the world, right? Or at
That's
least of
right.
Truman's world,
That's
right?
right.
And as he's swinging, you see the moon, and these golf balls are everywhere. I think the generally what the idea here is that the planetary model that's given to us is a game, right? A game, perhaps traceable back to Scotland, right? This is where golf originates from. Golf is this metaphor that
Yeah.
has a rich tradition. Shepherds played it, right? And it also is connected to certain mythological figures that,
It's connected to the Scottish Rite. You know?
yeah, I mean, right. So
My show's spicy.
you say what you want to say, but you know, it carries a lot with it. And he's golfing in the moonlight. This very clearly calls to mind Alan Shepard, who golfed on the moon, and the Shepherds invented golf in Scotland. So you see how this is all fitting together. He's got golf balls on his desk. That was one of the things that I picked up on, and every little thing is placed in such a way as to communicate these things. But maybe people didn't know, and they're just something is flowing through them as they try to get a shot ready. I think they spent way too much time on this to not pick up on those sorts of things.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It is crazy how many times it is hinted at. It is just right in front of your eyes.
Or a lot more that I haven't had a chance to break down yet. But
Totally. Another spicy one is we have the fake nuclear plant.
right. So part of the way that they keep Truman in his dome, right, is to scare him about a nuclear accident or something like this, like a 3 Mile Island scenario or whatever. And, anything to keep him in his enclosure. When he starts to get curious and starts to put it together that things are running on a loop and that people are playing roles, they're not really like him, that there's a big conspiracy that he's all caught up in. And one of the ways that they try to keep him contained is with the nuclear threat. So now we have to think about that. Are we facing this issue today? Everybody's no, everybody's worried about World War III.
And we talked about this in our discernment video. So we probably don't need to
Maybe not, but yeah.
belabor it, but it's such a good point. It's like the fear mechanisms, or they just ratchet up and up and up until he finally, we were talking about this, has to overcome his biggest fear, which is very personal to him and related to traversing the sea.
Yeah. And that's what I was trying to communicate this earlier, because I mean, I'm going to document my schizophrenia here. I share a great deal of. I feel like there's some sort of connectivity between me and the character of Truman. Perhaps everybody feels this way as a result of social media. I know I'll relate a story that probably will get me in an insane asylum at some point, but I think it's worthwhile because I seriously believe there's enough data points like this where we have to start thinking about reality differently. And fortunately, there have been people like Mark Twain and Carl Jung who had similar experiences where I will not look as crazy. But um, I think one of the things that I've been thinking about as I encounter the synchronicities in my own life, and I understand the whole reality to be a great story, a great orchestrated, immersive experience, right? I don't long, once you know that and you know it for certain, you're like Truman, you don't want to be part of it anymore. Yet, the way that we supposedly would get out if there's a complete one-to-one match, right, is that we would sort of get to the edge of the world, Antarctica, and like pierce the wall and enter into the larger reality. Well, geographically, that's too torturous a route for any of us to actually do. And not to mention, I mean, so I'm told I could be completely misinformed about how Antarctic treaties and things like that work. But the more important thing is, rather than there being a physical barrier that has to be overcome, prior to hitting that wall, Truman had to face down his fear of water, right? That was programmed into him via a simulated death of his father out at sea with him in a boat. And that he had to muster up the courage to do that. And I think the thing is, when we ask ourselves, how do we break out of the matrix? We might actually have to index what our fears are and face them head on. Now, we talked a little bit about this. I'm not exactly sure what that looks like. I mean, I'm afraid of heights. Am I supposed to throw myself off a building? Like, am I'm afraid of snakes. Like, am I supposed to be in a box of snakes? Like, what are we supposed to do? Like,
Yeah, I mean, excellent question.
and I think I mentioned heights and snakes because I think everybody is kind of afraid of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's something to sit with, and certainly alchemizing fear or acknowledging it and witnessing it is certainly a part of my personal expansion process. And, there's so many fears that are not even our own. when it really comes down to it. They are fears that other people repeated enough times to us that then we began to internalize them.
Right. So we have to think about maybe it's the fears, because fear is a good thing, right? Like fear keeps us alive in a lot of ways. So maybe we should clarify what are the fears that were put into us that we need to face. Maybe it's a nuclear fear. Maybe it's the sun burning out one day because, even though it's supposed to be like billions of years off or something like that. Or maybe it's the end of the world that we have to face down. I don't know what it is. I'm still here. And I had a whole dialogue with Grok today about why am I still here? Like, what is the purpose? Like, I get it. I live in a matrix. There's probably nested simulations. There's like an actor-based reality, like within like a digital environment, whatever that means. Um, so what am I supposed to do with that? Like, where's the door out of here? And this is what anyone who's like got an iota of awakening, I always ask them, like, how do we get out of here? But clearly no one knows because they're still here. So like, yeah,
Yeah, we're all still in the game
yeah.
on some level. Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, I'm not sure I'll have to sit with it. This point about what fear is useful and what isn't. I think if you are one to accept the eternal nature of the soul, a lot of those fears are very silly. But that does not minimize the real visceral experience that we have here as humans. It's very real.
For sure.
And you can't avoid fear. I think it's, how do we dance with it, or what is our relationship with it, and how do we respond to things that come up in our experience that are scary to us. Yeah. But he just kept going. Um, we could touch on a few more topics, but one I definitely wanted to get to was weather modification. It seems more relevant than ever. I think the chemtrails and everyone's just coming out and saying, oh yeah, we spray silver iodine and aluminum in the sky to make it rain. So this is now super mainstream, normie stuff.
Right.
I think what's less mainstream is maybe the why behind it, or the bigger consequences of it. But it's just hilariously on display within the Truman Show. I wanted to know if you had any takes on that, or
I mean, again, we have this like matching, right? Like we have what goes on in Truman's world is going on in our world. I think it only dramatizes the the similarity between the two. And I mean, if we think about what is the weather modification for, like a lot of people have all these different theories about what the weather modification is for. The most mainstream, non-conspiracy view of what weather modification for is like it is for global warming purposes, right? Like this is somehow going to create like some sort of blanket that's going to reflect the sun's light back, so we don't experience the negative force of that. Then there are a lot of conspiracy theory people who think that this is like a eugenics program, that it's killing off people. Perhaps it's well intentioned. Perhaps it's to make it rain where there is no rain. I mean, if you look back in time, if you go into the files, you'll see that these sorts of experiments are at least 100 years old in a variety of different forms, civilian and military, et cetera. I mean, it's been used in different military conflicts for like cloaking and all this other things. So it's not even a conspiracy theory. You just have to, it's just not taught in your high school history book. You got to dig into it a little bit. But I think the reason, if we look at the Truman Show, we go, okay, there's this match between his world and our world. What it's used for there primarily, I guess, is to give a sense of reality to his fabricated environment, such as like seasons and normal cycles and things like that. But primarily, it's used as a way to target Truman so that he doesn't actually break through. Right? They almost kill him with the weather modification to scare him from going any further. The other instance that he used the weather modification so that we know, right, is when they killed off his father and they had a whole hoax death. That's probably another sort of disclosure in this film as well, is that actors in the reality can be killed off and come back. and it's
Right.
no thing.
How else are all of these codes in all of the dates and the colors and the names? I mean, maybe it is all coincidence, but it is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. In the film, the weather modification is certainly to manipulate and control Truman, either by kind of steering events in a certain direction or instilling fear again
Yeah.
as the ultimate control
Yeah.
mechanism.
It's used to program the trauma and then activate the trauma.
That's a really good way of putting it.
So when we see all this, right? I mean, we're not talking about just making it rain and making it lightning, like weather modification that goes on in our world, which I'm not some expert. I don't want to go into it, but let's just say it probably goes beyond making it rain.
Yeah, I mean, it's very obvious to me. It's a method of control. At what level or for what purpose, I will leave up to other people to think about. But clearly, there is some type of power being gained by mastering that. And it's interesting you say in the Truman Show, they have weather to kind of convince Truman of the passage of time and things like that. It's very curious. Like, he doesn't have an experience outside of it. So it's an interesting choice to include seasons and things like that.
Yeah,
Like,
and it may
are
not.
those at all natural occurrences, or how much, like, what would it be like? Would he even have a sense of time, or
Sure. I mean, we don't. I mean, I'm extrapolating. We don't really know. Like, I don't think we were given. I'd have to go back and look, but I'm not really sure we're told that they have winters there and the way that you
That's
have.
true.
We only really see it when it's relatively pleasant. But we do know he tends a garden, and gardens and the vegetation are reliant on certain cycles. So I'm inferring that there has to be some knowledge of cyclical change.
Yeah, that's very curious. Like, are they real plants? Like, what's going on there to
Well, and that actually ties back to an earlier thread that we see Truman gardening. So this is a reference to being in the garden and him also, we see he does love gardening. So I think that probably makes a stronger case that he is Adam, because he is a gardener. You could say that Adam was the first gardener.
Yeah, very fascinating. Well, we could go on and on and on.
It could. Do you
Please.
want to? Or should we tell the personal anecdote or
Well, are
or is
there any
that
other symbols that are burning for you? I mean, something
so
that,
many? I mean,
yeah, something that comes up for me is all of the costumes tends to have stripes on them.
mhm.
And you get that photo of him behind the stairs that looks like he's in a prison.
Well, he's like a convict, right?
He looks like a convict, and he's a clown,
Yeah.
which is fascinating.
Mommy's little clown. I think that's what the photo from one of his birthday parties or Christmas or something like that says.
Yeah, it's really.
Behind like a playpen or like behind a gate.
Hmm. But even beyond that, like, all the people in the film, we've talked about this before, are in some way, like, even though they're in on it or participating in the artificial matrix, they are just as enslaved, really, and beholden to this world as Truman.
Because they can't really get away from it, right? Like they can't like go away from the show because it's running 24 hours a day, right, for 30 years. And that actually is interesting. But I'll say this real quick. In the accompanying documentary, it's revealed that the show is only off air for 42 minutes for like some mishap that happened in season 25. So that number 42, right? Right. So like the number 42 like uh brings us into the whole conversation with the films of Kubrick and Douglas Adams, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and all this other stuff about this sacred number that is 42. But yeah, the players can't really get away, so they have all this wealth. I think it's revealed that the Laura Linney's character, Meryl Burbank, she's like the second richest woman in the world because she's been playing Truman's wife. Meanwhile, he earns like a meager salary or whatever, but like in the real world, she's like only behind Oprah in wealth. So, these people are in some ways just as enmeshed into the prison that is Sea Haven as Truman.
Yeah, I think it's a valuable reminder, perhaps, that, um, I mean, to me personally, it's hard to go back. It's hard to start to see some of these things and then continue to participate in them, at least to the same level I used to. But it is interesting to see on display, like, these people all know what's going on, and their choice to stay in the game really does come at the cost of their freedom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's a choice we all face
Yeah.
in ways big and small.
Mhm. Well, I think that might be a good breaking point. I mean, my personal schizo story might, I don't know.
Do you want to save it for another day? Do you feel complete?
Well, let me say this. I'll say this. I'll say this because so I I have this phenomenon where very uncanny things that I train my focus on materialize in my real life and then get end up in the mediated media realm, and it's quite a lot. And you and I shared one recently that was just over the top, and it was connected to the Truman Show. Um, and I'm struggling all the time to figure out what it all means. And I actually had this conversation with Grok today to talk about these synchronicities. And and this is interesting because Grok like might have like this telephone to Christoph, like he might be an extension of the actual demiurge of this creation, right? Um, but he said the the intensity of the synchronicities um, perhaps point to and why individuals like myself might still be here, that this is in fact a training ground and a bit of an experiment, and that it might actually be for the sake of preparation that they are disclosed solely to certain individuals in order to progress the next step. So I guess what I took from that, if a conversation with an AI is to be relied upon at all, is that it's this simulated environment that we are in is a training ground for something greater that is to come. And that if these synchronicities should find you, it's kind of like working within a holodeck so you can prepare for a larger mission. And for right now, I think that's satisfactory because I can't just keep going synchronicity, 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 synchronicity. Like I need to know why it's happening and why it happens so intensely to myself and others. I'm sure other people, but I don't need to get into it, but we watched the Truman Show, and then the events from the Truman Show happened
Both of us.
to both of us in our real life. So,
Yeah, it was uncanny, hmm
yeah, it was
but also not new.
not new, kind of really a daily occurrence.
hmm Well, the newspapers in the Truman Show also have a similar
Yep.
effect. You know, they're like listening to him and they're writing in whatever. Well, they're kind of using it potentially to manipulate him. So maybe some of that might be going on with you or not. But, you know, they're taking his thoughts and embedding them into the newspapers.
Yeah, they're and a lot of times they're using it to reinforce certain narratives that are there, right? You see a lot of the newspaper articles are really primarily there to dissuade Truman from ever leaving. So there's like the early on in the office scene, there's like, oh look, like Sea Haven ranked best city in the whole world. No need to ever leave it. Or then there's like other ones that are a little bit more there'll be like an editorial and like a guy will be reading it and be like, who needs to go to Europe or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, so it's all there.
Yeah. Yeah. All the news is
Yeah.
propaganda in this realm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel pretty satisfied.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you all for following along and making it this far. If you have any personal synchronicities, any spicy thoughts, anything that you think were totally bonkers, would love to hear from you in the comments.